on claims for as little as $300, because after all, making $30 wasn't bad for mailing a letter, right? Well, I didn't agree with her. I had my sights set on making a lot more than $30 on each transaction, and you certainly should too. So that leads to the second secret of the found money business, and it's important to write this one down. Real estate unclaimed funds that are held by the county, especially from real estate overages, are almost always treated differently than those state-held unclaimed funds. Okay? When you deal with these county real estate funds that I'm telling you about now, you're generally going to find that there's no limits on your fees, at least the way that we set up our claims. Okay? These are rarely advertised anywhere. And I bet you can guess why. I told you earlier that the county gets to keep those funds sometimes if they're not collected in time. So they don't have a big motivation to advertise those. So they're usually not on a website or anything like that. And that's actually good for us because it makes it harder for claimants to find the funds that we've located for them. Okay, and with these state funds, a lot of times you have to have a private investigator's license, or you have to be bonded, or all sorts of different stuff. We've hardly ever seen any kind of special licensing for county funds. And best of all, you're going to find a lot of large amounts in there. We routinely find sums. Our bread and butter deals are $5,000 to maybe $20,000 or $30,000, but we've seen them in there for $200,000. The highest one I've ever seen is $998,000. So you can have much higher amounts in there. So over 10 years ago, like I was telling you, my friend Jim stumbled on the fact there was a large amount of unclaimed funds at the county and that some of them were about to be seized, and he even got that list. So what do you suppose he did? Now, it's easy to forget that before 2000, the Internet was still in its infancy and certainly not an effective way to locate somebody that you're looking to find. So he did the only thing he could do. He got out his 2-year-old phone book and started trying to look people up. And of course, he could hardly reach anyone because they'd usually moved in the meantime, or, if they didn't pay their taxes, they probably couldn't afford to pay their phone bill either, and they probably had their phone disconnected. Now, we still laugh about this today. What do you suppose his intro line was when he tried calling up these claimants? And I swear I'm not making this up. Today is your lucky day. Let's just say that didn't work out too well for him. But, even using that 2-year-old phone book, having no idea what to say on the phone, out of that big list that he got 4 people to agree to let him collect their funds for them. And Jim put together some paperwork, sent it out in the mail to the claimants, and 3 people returned it, all signed up. Well, guess what the 4th person did? They read the paperwork and went and collected the money themselves. They basically ripped them off, and I'm going to show you how to prevent that from happening to you in a little bit. Now, despite all these trials and tribulations, Jim pulled in more than 20 grand almost overnight from those 3 packages that came back to him signed off. And then every September after that, when the tax sale came, he says it was like Christmas time again, and I can definitely see why. Now, I knew how he was making these profits finally, and I couldn't have learned about it at a better time because I was really thinking fast with my rehabbing activities. Mortgage money was drying up in the area I was rehabbing, and I've been selling my properties to only the worst borrowers because these properties were in bad areas. And at one point I was feeding those properties to the tune of 10 grand a month just to keep those afloat. So I was more determined than ever to find something reliable that worked, and I was pretty sure that Jim had it. But I certainly didn't want to intrude on his territory. He'd become a good friend by then. But it didn't take me long to realize that I could go to all the other counties in Indiana and work those claims. With the rewards that I was expecting from those claims, I didn't mind spending a week in the car, running all over the place, picking up those records. And no, I don't drive around anymore getting records. I'm going to show you how to avoid that from the beginning right in a couple minutes here. So that first time, though, I got in the car, I drove to about 20 of the largest counties in Indiana, and I went and picked up the records. And instead of using Jim's approach, I tried to be a little smoother when I called people on the phone, and I used some of the resources that had since become available on the Internet to find these people. And I also sent out letters, and that was something that Jim hadn't done for a long time because they'd all come back returned when he tried it. But now I was able to find alternate addresses for people using the Internet. And when the dust settled that year, I'd collected almost $150,000 in overages from throughout Indiana, and that was knowing very little about the business, especially compared to now. And, I was happy with that, although looking back, I suffered from a little bit of short-sightedness for a while, just like Jim did. Okay, he only worked our home county, and at least I went all throughout the state, but eventually I realized I didn't have to limit myself to just Indiana. So I only live about 5 miles from Chicago, so first thing I did was find out more about Illinois tax sales, hoping to expand my business over there. And it turned out that Illinois just doesn't have tax sale overages the way their system is set up. So for a while, I just kept with Indiana. But visiting a lot of courthouses, I noticed that some other companies were doing the same business in Indiana from far away, like places like Georgia, Colorado, even California. And they were working in Indiana from way out there and making claims, and that's all while I was making six figures, part-time here, about 3 months of the year in the business locally. And some of those outfits from 2,000 miles away were collecting more in claims than I was. I could see their name as a claimant on the county records when they had a successful claim. So I wondered how these counties got their lists from thousands of miles away. I figured they must have had to fly out here or something and rent a car, and it must have been hideously expensive. But one day I saw a big envelope on the counter at a tax sale office in Indianapolis, and it turned out the county was sending all those records that I was driving out to pick up in the mail to a national county in Georgia that I had heard of before. So that leads to secret number 3. You can obtain the records of these surpluses or overage funds using public records requests, and in most cases receive them back by email or mail. And you can even get them in spreadsheet format a lot of times. So that means if you're in Utah, you can get lists of overages in South Carolina, or if you're in Idaho, you can get lists of overages in Florida. And that's without traveling there. So let's talk a little bit more about that, public records requests. Now, you can research online whether a certain state has overages, and you can also learn about the state's public records access laws or guidelines. Now, remember, don't be disappointed if your home state doesn't have tax sale overages, for example, because as you'll see in a minute, it makes no difference where you live when you're a found money professional. And I'm even aware of several people in Australia, New Zealand, and France that are working the business right now. So that even expanded my horizons of what I thought was possible even further. So once we determine that overages exist in a state, we're going to make a public records request with the agency that holds that foreclosure or tax sale. And we're going to get a list of the funds that are still on hand or individual records for each one of those claims if that's how they're kept. Now, here's some general concepts that are true in almost every state. All right? All agencies have to have completely open records, at least as it pertains to tax sales and or mortgage foreclosures, and they have to give you copies or allow inspection of those records. And counties really aren't allowed to conceal the funds that they're holding from you. They're a public office, and this is a public matter. There's nothing private about it. Okay, the agencies have to respond to your request in a certain amount of time. So a lot of these state public records acts, they give a firm deadline for the agencies to fulfill your request. So they can't just, they have to get back to you in a certain amount of time. Now, a lot of times they even have to email or mail those records to you if you request them sent in that format, and or provide an electronic format. And that can save you a lot of time retyping lists, and you can get these lists by email, so think how much time that saves. And why do they comply with the rules? Because there's penalties if they don't comply. So what's the easiest way to start getting your public records requests? I'll tell you, just email the agency that holds the sale. Almost all of them have email addresses that can be found online, and in many states, an email request is all it takes to get things into motion legally. And in a whole lot of other states, the own agency can technically demand that you send a letter, like a written request. They'll respond to an email also. So I have a saying, if you ever leave home to do this business, you're doing it wrong. Now, I'm only half serious, but the fact is I never leave home to get lists or find claimants or make claims. Now, yeah, I admit, sometimes I'll run to the post office or FedEx box or something, but if I'm busy, I'll even have FedEx come to my house and pick up my packages, so we'll get to that in a minute. Now, we get 90% of our overages records by email, phone, and regular mail, even fax sometimes. And on the rare occasion that we have to appear at the agency to pick the records up, we'll just run a free Craigslist ad, and we'll get a local person to go in and do that for us for maybe $25. With the economy bad right now, there's plenty of people that want to make $25 or $50 for an hour's work, and they don't mind making a little run for us to grab those records. And